which is of course a $1 billion industry. But even just from a governance lens, right? So you're seeing a lot more money flowing through using technology. The rise of direct benefit transfers, which often render the frontline workers in some ways redundant. We've had this instance many times when you're going to a school or talking to a school management committee and they say, can you help us? They go to the CRCC or the BEO and say, where is my money? The funds have not come. And the BEO and often even the district has no real idea because it's coming straight from either Government of India or state government. And so you have this increasing use of technology. You also have an increasing use of technology to monitor. In the morning, there was a lot of discussion on why are we even, Mr. Swaroop also talked about this supervision monitoring approach, set up cameras, set up attendance registers, biometrics. And so there's an entire host of how technology is being used to monitor. And then of course the rise in the number of apps. We were in Rajasthan, in health there were 48 apps. And those 48 apps mean that there are that many, the same person is probably inputting data into all of these apps. And a senior official of course told us that, हाँ जी मैडम डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर आते हैं कहते हैं कि हमारे पास एक फ्री ऐप है, फ्री है तो लेना चाहिए. And so an app is often introduced, but without really thinking about how that data is going to be used, who's going to use it, and of course who's inputting it. And it is often that same teacher, that same BRCC, CRCC, who's going to be involved in inputting the data. The other challenge, and we've seen this again and again, is that there is this, probably because of all of this, there's this underlying trend of collecting more and more data. A lot of data is being collected, and when you talk about it, often the worst part is that so much data is being collected, no one has an idea of how it's going to be used, but there's also a lot of mistrust in the system. So we've had, again, senior government officials saying that data is not trustworthy, even though it's their own data. And it comes again from this view of the frontline state as this self-serving body that is corrupt, that doesn't really think about anything except political patronage and trying to get to what they want to do. But the approach that we have been looking at is, have we actually done enough to understand the frontline? Why is it that in a mission mode kind of system, the same school teacher can do fabulously well in a summer camp, but when you put her in the everyday life, maybe she's not being able to perform or being able to inspire as many children as she did in a summer camp situation. And clearly, it can't be something else, right? It has to be the enabling environment to some degree because it's the same person. It's the same person who's doing really well in a certain set of conditions, but not really being able to do that well in another set of conditions. And this was a quote that we've heard multiple times. It's something that you hear from young IS officers as well when they join the IS. There's a lot of excitement, exuberance, and then slowly a little bit of jadedness starts to creep in. And so what is going on there? And I think what we've been looking at, and through, as you mentioned, even our PESA studies, which have a long acronym, but they include institutions, planning, expenditures, accountability, is that we haven't really addressed some of these 2-3 aspects. The first is of course administrative, seasonal work overload, getting more and more positions in order without actually role clarity, complex reporting structures, all of that thing that goes into actually setting up an administrative system. Even in a university setting, I think I can imagine how much work goes into this, getting the admin right. The second is of course the professional aspects. So low wage, the lack of professionalization, low wage maybe not for the teachers, but definitely for a lot of the frontline workers, which are often hired as contractual workers. There's often the idea that you're not really given that kind of respect, you don't really have a pathway of how you're going to go up in the bureaucracy. We've heard time and again, yes, trainings hote hain, no more trainings, but the trainings are highly ineffective and not really catering to what I need. And of course there's the political side as well, which works both ways. So on one hand there's high interference, in trying to do my work, but at the same time there's also at times when I'm having to navigate this, so trying to protect myself from political interference in implementation. And this is just some of the data that we have seen from a lot of our work. The first is, of course, the funding aspect of it. So when we looked at Gram Panchayat level financing, this was in Karnataka, out of 6 crore, it was 3% of the 6 crore that was flowing in the jurisdiction of a Gram Panchayat. It was only 3% or 20 lakhs over which the Gram Panchayat had any control or say. The rest of the time, it was just money that was flowing through it. And a large chunk of that money was education. We talk about education bureaucracy, but we've forgotten the role of the local governments in actually supporting education. And even though you mentor standing committees, they don't actually, unfortunately, have a big role to play. We were tracking and doing time use studies with cluster resource center coordinators. And again, the amount of time that's spent in the classroom is limited. And when you ask them why and you start mapping it out, a lot of their time is, of course, going in, getting government orders, translating government orders, collecting data, submitting data upwards. So they've become more administrators than academic support staff. And of course, there's lack of autonomy, and we've heard this even in Akshay's presentation. But then when you want to do something, you are often not allowed to. But even, and if you still go ahead and do it, there are always these repercussions that could come about. I've heard many times officials telling us, even district level, saying, I really wanted to do an innovation, I did it, and then of course I got called up by my supervisor, so now look at me, I'm going to do nothing from going forward, I'm just going to sit and just do what the rules say, as Akshay was mentioning in the previous presentation. And in all of this mess, we have just gone and made it even more messy by adding a lot of those layers that I spoke about. Those layers include non-state actors, those layers include this whole push for convergence. Creating these maps, which we call cognitive maps in some ways, was an exercise in itself, because there is no organogram often that you find, right? And even if organograms exist, they exist for a particular office. So you'll know what the district office looks like, but how does the district office interact with all the other departments? How does the district office interact with citizens? How does the district office interact with non-state actors? So even this creating this map required going from officer to officer. And the inability to actually have these maps says a lot, right? Like, you don't really have a way of thinking of where you are in the larger context of the governance system. You see yourself as within this particular small subset, but you don't really have a sense of where you fit in terms of the rest of the structure. So that's kind of what we've seen. And I'm going to wrap up with just 3-4 ideas, starting with saying things are not going to change unless we actually focus on the front line. And while the national education policy says a lot of interesting things, whether it talks about the school complexes, it talks about light but tight regulatory framework, it talks about cross-ministerial collaboration, it uses words like responsiveness, it uses words, all the right words, it talks about flexibility and autonomy, unless we fix the front line. And for that you need to actually equip, enable and reduce. I'm going to end with just 3 ideas. I'm not saying that this is everything, but this is 3 things that we have seen states try, or even frontline workers try, which seem to be making some level of difference or moving the needle. So the first is, of course, rethinking competencies. Everyone talks about everything that, whenever we talk about capacity building or training, it's often based on individual competencies. But a question that actually a senior bureaucrat asked us was, what about team-based competencies, right? Why are we always thinking about I as a headmaster or I as someone, a science educator? What about I as a school teachers within that particular school? So actually thinking of team-based competencies. And similarly, trying to build society capacity. And here it's a lot of these other aspects of collaboration, how do you negotiate, how do you empathy, how do you listen. Skills like that are often not taught in many of our training institutes. The second is building an ecosystem of norms and reflection. Norms is what Akshay also spoke about. And we've been looking at the state government of Meghalaya is trying to do a lot of these interesting things of how do you get IS officers to put themselves in another officer's shoes, right? Exercises like that, which are a lot of contemplation and reflection, actually get a really interesting conversation going. I remember accompanying state and district education officers to schools, and they had not been to schools for a long time because they were so stuck in the office. And it was amazing. They were like, "Acha, ye bhi badal gaya. This has also changed. Oh, this is new." So that idea of actually like doing diversity walks, trying to understand what another perspective is. We've also been running these capability forums of peer learnings. Conferences like this is not always open to all officers at every level. So actually having these kind of forums where politicians and bureaucrats come together to learn from each other has been another interesting exercise that they're doing. And lastly is identifying the right partnerships. So yes, the non-state has been increasing, but actually relatively less institutionalized at the local level. I think this morning also someone was talking about there are also these small pilots that happen, but how do you actually institutionalize it? The case study that we were looking at was rural libraries in Karnataka, and what was interesting in that aspect was that while they did use partners a lot, it was for a very specific purpose, but the control, the competencies were not outsourced to external actors, but were held strongly with the state. So while partners were used to help in getting materials, help in getting some of the inclusion infrastructure right, but it wasn't that everything was outsourced, so that internal state capacity continued to be built through collaborations by setting up these local committees. So I'll end here. Oh, there's one more, sorry. I'll end here just to say that I think there is hope, but I think what we haven't done enough of is focus on the frontline bureaucracy. And that's a critical area that we need to build up in order to actually fulfill the NEP goals going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abhi, for this wonderful talk. In fact, you stole many of the ideas that I had for tomorrow's discussion. I have much less to say tomorrow. That will hopefully pick it up. So, thanks for ending before time, so now we have time for questions.
I'm curious because you have been talking about Karnataka. I do work very closely with Karnataka. So, you were talking about the rural library. Are you talking about GB library, right? So, how was the education department responding to these libraries? Because they work, that's my understanding, they work as independent entity. They don't talk to each other.
Yeah. Right? No, I completely agree with you, and that's where it's interesting that we always, when we think of convergence, there's a lot better convergence at the ground level than there is at the senior level, right? And that's where I guess a lot of the siloness happens the more you go up the chain. But at the ground level, what's been interesting is that you do have schools, teachers engaging with the libraries, bringing their children, getting them enrolled into the libraries. You see a lot of people, it's a way of actually also just checking out enrollment. So we've seen that both enrollment and attendance in libraries has increased. We haven't done an evaluation, so for us it was more about the process of actually getting different actors and the ground level to work in convergence, but looking at focused on the ground level. And at the ground level you see a lot of this coming together. I agree with you that it's not, I don't think it's fully absorbed internally or internalized at every level as you go above the bureaucracy chain.
No, I'm not even getting into above the bureaucratic level, vertical levels. I'm talking about even horizontal. Children do come to the libraries, right?
Yeah.
They spend 1 hour, half an hour, whatever. When they go back to the classroom, you don't see there's a connect between these two activities.
Yeah.
Right? It should happen at that level, then it makes sense.
I think
I'm not even sure about attendance side because I have first-hand information, so I don't think that actually is happening.
So for me, it's not, but I think what was really interesting for us when we were in the field looking at libraries is that why are we thinking about it only from an education or school perspective? Because the libraries became spaces where different actors, it became like a safe space.
No, I'm not talking about connecting that to a direct curriculum or core curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the secondary impact. Some curiosity.
Which we see. Which we are seeing in terms of even people coming and reading the newspaper. We've seen like people who, so for example, she's very active on Twitter, so everyone would have seen her stories, but also like we've also seen like a mother with special needs kids coming into that and that being a safe space. A lot of women, and they've actually come up with women hours. So those are the ways in which I think that a public space could be used for not just teaching and learning, but actually just now they're doing chess and games also, so not only about books. So those are very interesting to watch. But I agree with you that it takes a lot that in terms of it has to be convergence bottom up rather than top down.
Thanks. Next question. Here.
First of all, congratulations for the new venture. So from my own field work in Anganwadis, what we have understood that Government of India has sort of started co-locating Anganwadis with school so that there is a continuum. So while it's a good approach, it's like pitting two inequals together, right? Because school teachers are always frowning upon Anganwadi problem. So this absence of actual structural changes, while just focusing on more approach towards changes, do you think it's actually leading somewhere? Because I see a lot of this actually coming from non-state actors as you were predicting. Like a lot of change in approaches, like change the approach towards monitoring. How you monitor, how you approach it. Yes, it's fine and good. But without structural changes, that's not going to happen. So this misbalance, how do you approach this?
I think that what we should all do, and we try to do that for Anganwadi, is to see, have the budgets converged, and most of the time no. Right, and that says a lot. So the reason that we've used money as a lens is that money doesn't lie that much, but more importantly, it's easy to track, right? And it tells you a lot. It tells you who has the power, are you actually putting your money where your mouth is in some ways. And so we've really struggled to see the actual convergence of these departments. When we used to go to talk to the education department versus the WCD department, there was no real connect happening. I'm not saying it won't happen. I think that there will be pockets again where they are actually talking to each other, where sometimes the same officers connect with each other. But I completely agree with you that I don't think the process was well thought of. For a well thought out process, you should have thought about how you're converging people and funding at every step of the way. Convergence is often not really thought about in that sense.
I also, I think just
We have one.
It's not a question, it's a follow-up.
I agree.
I'm not asking. Just saying that, like from my own experience in UP, there is a lot of resource sharing which is happening at the ground level. So there were Anganwadis which didn't have teacher, but they were using school systems, right? But that getting actually actualized at the upper level, that still remains.
That's what we are. That's exactly what we were saying.
Thanks.
Great work, and we all know how tough it is to do this kind of work nowadays. But I'm also wondering if we need to, this category that we are using non-state actors. That's a very large category, right? It includes organizations like yours, academic institutions. It also includes consulting firms who are chasing this purely capitalistic reasons, right? And I wonder if you need to distinguish this, and maybe from your work, if you're finding any sort of, what is the impact of this large profit-seeking non-state actors that are entering into, presumably as a sort of substitute for lack of bureaucratic capacity. But what is it doing to bureaucracy? What is it doing to governments?
Yeah, so great question, and I think, so we did try and categorize it. It's not easy because there's a lot of intermixed categories, and same people are also setting up multiple entities. So one arm profit, one arm not for profit, one arm something else. But having said that, we did try and categorize it in this global education monitoring report that UNESCO does. It was on, the theme for India was on non-state actors. I think it's going to rise. I think the question, and that's what we were trying to use that approach, is there's relatively less regulation of it. And yes, on the things that is regulated, there is over-regulation, and then there's things that are completely unregulated. So how do you find some systems and processes to find that right balance of regulation and not over-regulation, but not complete free hand? Having said that, one of my biggest worries is this outsourcing part. And I'm constantly, even when we are going and working with state governments, I'm constantly saying, no, we cannot do it for you, but we can help you, like give you the tools to do it. But there's that immediate thing of, please write our policy for us. We've got requests of saying, please write this document for us. And so I'm wondering whether the non-state also has to kind of have that, somewhere we need to draw a line of saying that beyond this part, otherwise we are running the state, which is always scary and also unethical. So yeah, I do think that we need to find that way of regulating, but someone had said, rightly so, the non-state is one sector which doesn't even have a name that it calls itself. Like the corporates are known as the corporates of the industries. The government is known as the bureaucracy, government officials. The non-state has so many different criteria, and most of us, even an NGO is not everyone calls themselves an NGO, right? So at one point we need to identify and define the identity as well. But I'll share the report with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So what we see is that the bureaucracy, even with the digitization, there is always an increase in the roles and responsibilities. So but is there state capacity is very limited, but the responsibilities are there. But is there any state which has done and freed up some of the responsibility from this bureaucracy so that at least the performance has improved? So there is a saying that in state capacity, free the state capacity.
Yeah. I think some tasks technology has helped free up. So use of technology has helped you save time on certain tasks. But no immediate example comes to mind. It's a short answer. But what we have seen is more and more posts being hired. So recognizing that there is a limited, overburden, you're hiring more posts. I do have a question mark there because in Assam, for instance, we heard about some posts being hired, but I said, where is the job description? And there was no job description yet created, but interviews for that position were getting hired. So often we do it not the right way around of saying, this is the need, this is the job JD for it, and this is what we're hiring for. You're hiring and then figuring out how to fit the person in. But it's a way to get around that overburdening aspect.
Also in most private actors, like as a point of view, a lot of private schools are involved in education. So where they take up part of the job, is it really helping the government or not?
I don't think there'll be one answer. I think that there are dangers of it because we've also seen enough examples when the partner leaves things. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll speak.
Or the learning outcomes, which are the outcomes of the policy. But in this study, I am trying to look at the more fundamental aspect or the more foundational aspect of this policy, which is how it is implemented, the different forms that it takes, and the underlying mechanisms that lead to these different forms in these contexts. Now, this study speaks to the body of literature on state-society engagement, and it uses Ostrom's agenda-setting work of how public services are not just delivered, but are co-produced by these state-society engagements and interactions. So, school consolidation broadly refers to the concept of closing down small schools, small community schools, and integrating them into larger, better resource schools. The two presumed benefits of this move are, the first is fiscal benefit, which is reducing the per student cost, and the second is educational benefit, which is having better resources in the integrated schools or better student-teacher ratio and so on. Now, Betty and West describe this as a revolutionary move that has remade the American public education system. However, in the Indian context, it is not very familiar. because most of the educational reforms in India have been access oriented. For example, the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan in 2001, which the target was to get all the children into schools, education for all. So a large number of schools were constructed in the next decade from the implementation of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan in 2001. Now with these construction of schools, there were some concerns such as multi-grade teaching that was happening, per student expenditure, a large number of schools in a very closely located area. And because of these concerns, the policy makers then experimented with this school consolidation or rationalization policy. So these trends show a steady decline in the number of government schools from 2012. The major waves coming in 2014 and 18. Talking about the specific case of Rajasthan, because Rajasthan was one of the early adopters of this policy. A lot of rural schools were specially consolidated in Rajasthan. Media has also covered this extensively, talking about the student ratios, the impact on teachers and so on. Talking about some existing literature on school consolidation, so there are some major themes in the literature such as the student outcomes, the curriculum and pedagogical changes, and community satisfaction. Now community becomes an important aspect over here because literature suggests that especially in rural context, schools are important centers of community activity. So schools also shape the community identity in ways. And because of this, some scholars also talk about a case-by-case analysis of this school consolidation, because these experiences could be very different and sometimes even contradictory to one another. Talking about the specific mechanism of school consolidation, it is presumed that all assets of the current school will be shifted to the consolidated school, and specifically in the case of Rajasthan, Rao et al. Described that how there are two major defining characteristics that are used to consolidate school. One is that if the school has an enrollment of less than 30 students, and the second is if there are two schools located within a range of 1 kilometer, so they would be consolidated into one. The methodology that I used for this study is that the preliminary information was gathered through media reports and news coverage. So the media largely covered how there were several blocks in Udaipur where schools were consolidated. So then I went to Udaipur and through this NGO Seva Mandir, I got access to these communities. In these communities and within this block, the block officer was kind enough to provide a list of the schools that were to be consolidated, although he did not agree to an interview. But I was able to interview and have focus group discussions with the local community members, teachers of the school, students and parents of these children. Out of these, 4 major cases emerged that I would be talking about here. Firstly, some description of the site. So this block, this is one particular block in Udaipur, which is Jhadol block. There is a majority of tribal population over here. The literacy rate is much lower than the national average, and it is a hilly terrain overall. So now coming to the cases, these cases are village based. So this first village was a larger village which was divided into habitations by the presence of forests and an artificial lake. So in this village there was one Rajiv Gandhi Prathamik Vidyalaya, that is a primary school, and a government school which functioned from grades 6 to 10. Now these two schools were to be consolidated into one. Now, when this consolidation happens, the block officer sends or asks for approval from the school teacher as well as broadly the school management committee. But the community members in this village talked about how the school teacher did not consult them. So they did not know that the school was about to shut down or it was to be consolidated. Again, because I do not have the access to government data, this is the reported number that the community members said that there were over 100 children in the school, yet it was shut down because the school teacher did not consult with them and just went on with the consolidation movement. So the community members then expressed a sense of regret, and this regret increases because there are also some instances where, for example, the children now have to cross the artificial lake to access school, and there have been some episodes where children have drowned while crossing the lake. So these are episodes of special regret, and then the communities send applications or try to get the school to reopen, but it has not been successful as of now. In the second case, in this village, there was a primary school with only one Shiksha Karmi teacher. But this Shiksha Karmi teacher was into drug abuse. So the community on their own tried to counsel the teacher, tried to get the school to function well. But when it did not work out, the parents started pulling the students out of the school. So enrollment decreased and finally the school was shut down. Now a local resident from the village decided to set up, converge with the NGO, which is Seva Mandir, and open a non-formal education center over there. So then the village committee decided that okay, we do have this school building which is vacant now, so they allotted that school building to the non-formal education center, thus substituting the school with a non-formal education center. In the third case, in this village, interestingly, a primary school and a higher secondary school were functioning within a 1 kilometer range, and therefore it fits into the criteria and the schools had to be merged. But the school teachers and the principal felt that both the schools have good infrastructure and a good enrollment, so the schools need not be shut down. So then they negotiated with the block officer saying that the schools need to be functional and if that could be considered. And so the schools were only merged by management type, which essentially means that now the principal is in charge of both the schools, but both the schools are functioning on the two sides only. So now it's one school but on two sides. The fourth case is of community resistance. So in this village there was a primary school which had less than 10 children in school, so it was decided to be shut down. But then the village committee, when they found out, and the school management committee, they decided that we do have children in the village, it is just that they are not enrolled or attending the school. So then the community had an enrollment drive through which the number of children in the school was increased to over 30, and therefore the school was not shut down. So here the community successfully was able to keep the school open and not get it merged. Now these four cases show that the school consolidation policy is a process that the state agency takes in and an experience for the local community members, because of which there is an interaction and a negotiation that happens between the state actors and the societal actors. The cases 1 and 2, which were of some episodes that led to community regretting the school closure, shows some aspects of what Professor Mangla discusses as episodic and substitutive co-production, where some episodes lead to the community realizing the need for co-production or deliberation of some policy implementation, or otherwise substituting it with a private form. Also, there is one case which shows how the street level bureaucrats or the school teachers understand, interact and then enact the policy. All of those three leading to adaptive implementation of the policy, and then overall that this deliberation of the society and state actors is co-producing the policy implementation. To conclude, I would just say that school management committees are also important agents of mobilization for the community, and the lack of government school may have an impact on privatization with the community shifting to private substitutes, and Overall, the virtue of this engagement, the state of this interaction leads to the various forms that the policy implementation takes. And I'm not making claims about the norms of bureaucracy because these are just 4 villages and I have the community angle, not the bureaucratic angle. But this is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Eeshita, on time. So maybe we take 2-3 questions and then answer together because we only have 5 minutes. So questions, please. Yes.
So a lot of these issues are there because another norm was violated, which is that private schools were not supposed to open within a certain range of government schools. But they did open, and very often the students study in the private school but come to the government school for meals and go back. And now we are talking of school mergers. So, you know, the violation of one norm is leading to the creation of another, and it's something to be looked at. I know that CPR and Accountability Initiative also did a study in Rajasthan using GPS data. In some cases, they found 80,000 children. It's on, but it's not working yet. So I know that I'll just speak loudly. CPR and Accountability Initiative also did a study in Rajasthan and found some 80,000 children were out of school. They used GPS data and other things. So I'm sure that similar things will be there. But I just want to mention one other thing, which is that for some reason the bureaucratic push seems to have been more to consolidate schools because many teachers were teaching more than one grade at one time. But this very government, by which I mean the government itself, about 3 decades ago, they worked on what is called small class multi-grade pedagogy, because it was found that is far more effective than monograde situations, because children of different ages working together leads to better learning for all if the number does not exceed beyond a point. So in fact the small schools were actually a strength, but that seems to have been forgotten, and now we are looking for this. So I just want to add this to the mix of understanding how bureaucratic thinking is happening. It's informed by very peculiar notions of efficiency, I would say.
Maybe one more question and then you can answer. Question, comments? Yeah.
So did you look at the bureaucrat's response to school consolidation?
So thank you. I think that was more of a comment on understanding. So thank you for that. About this, so I did go to the block office and the officer actually gave me the list of schools that were to be consolidated, but he did not agree to an interview. Although some understanding that I could get from the community members talking about the bureaucratic response is what I can tell you right now, because this is part of an ongoing study and probably later on I can talk to the bureaucrat.
Just to add on to Suli's comment, it is true that many times private schools are set up in the neighborhood, and there is also a strong preference for the private schools, and government school enrollment, gradually declined. But we also see that within a small village, so there are multiple schools being set up, and the parental preference has always been to go to a school which has higher number of grades. Grades which are up to 7th grade or up to 10th grade. So we did field work in Karnataka at many places. So the co-location of schools, with higher grade versus the smaller grades, always leads to neglect of the schools with the lower enrollment, lesser number of grades. And we did the field work in Pune itself, in rural areas. There the parents were telling that, okay, in my school there are only 4 children. If you are thinking that your school should have, along with the regular pedagogy, sports and other things, where will they be? There are only 2 children or 3 children. So, हम कहाँ पर भेजे उसको? क्या खेल सकते हो? Apart from the regular classes. And other problem that comes with this single teacher school is that they say कि अगर एक कभी-कभी छुट्टी पे चला जाता है and CRC वाले they don't replace it, and the school is shut for that day because it's a single teacher. So they say that because of this, I would prefer to send a school which has more number of teachers and functioning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eeshita. So now we have a second presentation by Parth.
Participatory research and contextualization in local governance. This paper also takes a secondary research approach to make a positive case for integrating participatory research to education governance. So a few assumptions for us to all agree upon. Public policy does not operate in a very predictable environment. This is true especially for the context of education, where India's social, cultural and economic diversity directly impacts how policy is implemented beyond just the policy making cycle. One size fits all strategies we've noticed do not work because the system itself isn't homogeneous. Therefore, our capacity must be given special focus during policy making. Now, as we've already discussed and many will discuss, increasing bureaucratic capacities and equitable governance is not a simple question of increasing the number of bureaucrats attached, the budget attached, or for that matter even public-private partnerships. This complex reality is exacerbated in rural and indigenous populations, those who struggle to find their footing in political and social institutions in this country. Coming to the question of the NEP, it sets quite a few ambitious goals for itself, such as universal access to education, achievement of foundation literacy by grade 3 itself, promotion of vocational and skill-based education. It also highlights the importance of technology in education, advocating for digital classrooms and virtual learning. But the policy itself is as strong as the systems are implemented. Right? This is where the theme for our discussion today becomes very core and very central. The critical role of governance, especially the capacity of bureaucratic systems, in translating the NEP's objectives into tangible outcomes. Now, my arguments are as follows. The aim of Indian governance should be to contextualize educational governance by tailoring structures to socio-economic and cultural context, ensuring that national policies like the NEP address the unique challenges of diverse regions, particularly in rural and tribal areas. To achieve this, it is essential to promote participatory research by integrating methods such as community mapping, community audits into policy formulation and implementation, enabling data-driven decision-making that ensures policies are relevant and reliable. Furthermore, government should focus on ensuring equitable access to quality education by addressing disparities in educational connectivity, infrastructure, and culturally appropriate curriculum, especially in these inaccessible regions. Now, reforming regional syllabus, which is another important aspect of my argument, by incorporating indigenous knowledge and cultural concepts in early education is crucial for cultural protection, which will be discussed in the case study. Now, first let's discuss a few core problems with the existing policies. I believe we've already discussed, and a lot of people have already discussed bureaucratic capacities, the inaccessible regions, and for that matter even the lack of contextualized data. So I'll focus on 2 points which I feel which are very important to this presentation. First is the parental perceptions and prioritization, because it's a very interesting problem, right? It's equally as diverse as the country itself. How parents perceive the importance of education depends on their socio-economic background as well as their surroundings. Parental satisfaction with educational outcomes and past experiences become key to these trends of prioritization. This is not to say that policies should mold themselves around each household, but effective policy communication requires the understanding of why these perceptions and prioritizations change. Finally, when it comes down to NGOs and CSOs, they play a very crucial role in supporting implementation efforts and ensuring accountability. Yet, very limited involvement and information sharing networks between the CSOs, NGOs and governments, bureaucracy specifically, exists in the field of education. With this, let's understand what participatory research is and break it down to certain first principles. I'll break this section down into 3 fundamental questions, which is what, how, and why. First, what? Participatory research is a method of research that uses systematic inquiry in direct collaboration with those who are affected by an issue being studied for the purpose of action or change. Now, essentially this means that whoever has an important stake to play in this particular situation, be it a recognized researcher to a common civilian, they are engaged in this method of research. Now the how is answered by the relevant methods under the umbrella of participating research, which is action research, education research, rule replacement, etc. For the lack of time, I won't explain all of them, but I've given the definitions in the presentation so that it's easier for us to visualize. Finally, the why. Why am I trying to argue for participatory research in education systems? Well, participatory research goes beyond simply gathering reliable data. It becomes a powerful tool for empowering communities, building genuine ownership of policy reforms. Now, the word ownership will become important when we discuss certain case studies as well. When people actively engage in shaping the policies that impact their daily lives, they shift from being passive recipients to key stakeholders. This creates a bridge between the government institutions and the citizens themselves, therefore aligning their policy goals with the actual needs and aspirations of the community. By integrating community voices, we ensure that policies are not just well crafted but also practical, grounded in real world conditions, and embraced by the people that they are designed to help, leading to more effective, resilient, and lasting reforms that can truly transform their lives. Now, coming on to a few case studies, I'll be looking at international case studies just so that we can pick out certain trends and put that into Indian context. First, we have the District Development Support Program in South Africa, which was aided by USA and conducted by RTI International. Now, the project was conducted over 5 years, which was in 1998 and 2003. The project operated on a singular goal to improve the quality of education delivery, with 4 sub-goals which included curriculum as well. The successful nature of the project was accredited to several factors, 2 of which are particularly relevant to participatory methods. First, the project operated under the principle of decentralized ownership, bringing all stakeholders to own the project, thus ensuring a high level of involvement by the participating institutions as well as continuous consultations with the stakeholders involved in the project. Secondly, the participatory evaluation tools which were created to evaluate the progress of the project are very important to the way we look at how stakeholders engage with education. Next, we move on to the revolutionary ASEP law in Bolivian education to decolonize the state's education system and protect the cultural heritage. Now, Bolivian indigenous people have suffered historically at the hands of persistent colonial and military rule. Until the election of President Morales in 2006, the first indigenous leader in Bolivia, under his rule, the ASEP law was created with the goal of introducing social justice and interculturality within Bolivian education. Finally, we travel to New Zealand, where the presence of participatory research is basic to Maori traditions and practices. Now, the research of Lynn Aika and Janica Greenwood shows that the community organization of the Maori mandates community investigations and redeveloping acknowledged systems for community preservation and the benefit of the people. This is manifested in education policy as well, with the establishment of Te Kura Kuapa Maori, which are Maori language immersion schools, which has become an important part of New Zealand's education policy addressing their indigenous populations. Let's denote a few learnings which are relevant to Indian policy making from these 3 examples. First, the core learning from the District Development Support Program was the importance of ownership and participation in education policy implementation. Furthermore, the methodology to confirm the impact and progress of the project is a scalable approach to development. This approach ensured that implemented policies were tailored to specific needs and contexts, leading to greater sustainability and effectiveness. The ASEP reform was driven by extensive engagement with local communities, using participatory research methods such as consultations, workshops, and community audits, through which indigenous and rural communities were able to actually involve themselves in the creation of curriculum and of the policy itself, therefore reflecting the diverse linguistic, culture, and social realities of the Bolivian population. Instead of imposing a one-size-fits-all policy, the ASEP law was built from ground up, incorporating local insights, needs, and traditions. This direct involvement of local bureaucrats as well as local community ensured the law was not just contextually relevant, but also widely accepted and supported by those it impacted. Finally, when we look at the Maori communities, we notice that the community leaders, educators, and leaders were involved when it comes to community consultations in the Te Kura Kaupa Maori education schools. Right? The governments a recognition and integration into the national education framework of these certain immersion schools which were created by the Maori community itself proves that participatory research can become an integral part of policy making. A few recommendations from the readings and from the case studies itself come out when we look at it from an Indian context. Placing these learnings in the Indian context, we understand that there's a sheer difference between the population and stakeholder communities within the President states and India. However, we are more than capable of taking these principles and implementing it as policies from the Indian perspective. First, the principle of ownership tackles the larger problem of privatization, dropout rates, and community engagement that even the NEP talks about. Mandating annual education policy audits at a district level may be a resource-intensive task, but it will surely improve social understanding and community involvement in policy making. Furthermore, creating local-level panels for school management with the presence of local stakeholders furthers the principle of ownership. If parents are involved in education planning, their enthusiasm to send their children to their schools will skyrocket. At a state level, it is possible to institute Maori-type bottom-up style policy making for community and linguistic preservation. In this modern age of creative economy, such indigenous knowledge bases are not just a huge boost for Indian tourism and rural employment, but also for India's soft power. Therefore, in inaccessible areas, establishing curriculums based on audit panels with community leaders and local bureaucrats is the most important method to increase community participation. Additionally, such approaches definitely will reduce the incredible load on local and state level bureaucracy, thus improving their capacity to focus on policy drafting and implementation through engagements rather than direct influence. Through this, we've already identified the role that government stakeholders play. However, there's a very important role that even CSOs and NGOs will play. By engaging with marginalized groups, these organizations ensure that policies are grounded in the real needs of the people. Working alongside bureaucracy, the NGOs can complement the strength of the bureaucracy by providing grassroots insights and organizing community consultations. This partnership streamlines government efforts while addressing the larger concerns of government disengagement with the community. Ultimately, CSOs and NGOs transform governance, making policies more relevant, practical, and impactful, ensuring that they serve the people that they are designed to help. Now, Professor Mangla's discussion on Himachal Pradesh is one of the best examples for us. I do recognize that there are several challenges to this approach, some of which I have addressed. Incorporating indigenous knowledge into syllabus often risks oversimplification. Also, dependency on community engagement and CSO and NGO involvement is not the most sustainable method, since bureaucracy and other sources will not have a direct stake on ground. However, enhancing bureaucratic capacity is not just about streamlining administration. It is about empowering the governance to be adaptable, inclusive, and responsive. It's also about empowering the people to enter a place where they can make influence on governance and make it adaptable to their needs as much as possible. The NEP 2020 has set the stage for transformative change, but its success depends on our ability to govern effectively, efficiently, and equitably. By strengthening our governance frameworks, by increasing local participation, we can create an education system that not only meets the goals of the NEP 2020, but also prepares India for the challenges of the future. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think?
Thank you, Parth, for taking time. Maybe we can have 2-3 questions together and then we can answer. Yeah. Questions, comments, feedback.
So, I absolutely believe in participatory research and participatory work. I'm still going to ask you, the community one is less informed, may not have a lot of exposure to say what are the new possibilities. How do you go about ensuring, and whoever does that, you will influence your perspectives, right? And then that's what becomes, then if they believe in it, you meaning whoever is facilitating, then that's the route it would go. Not necessarily the best for the community. How do you come to that? So if you have any thoughts, So I'm saying I believe we've done a lot of work on that, but I still would like to hear from you.
Sure. So the first thing about the first point that you made was that communities themselves may not have a lot of knowledge about certain policies and how education systems are working. But in my opinion, and in a lot of researchers who work on participatory research methods, the idea of participatory research itself is not just to get their opinions, but also to impart certain levels of knowledge and awareness about policy making. In my opinion, it is one of the better ways to ensure that the realities of the policies are able to get to the people in a decentralized manner, wherein reading a policy document is not easy for even policy experts. Right? Why would it be easy for a person who doesn't have that sort of education? Why would it be easy for a parent who's looking forward to sending their child for grade 1 education? Right? Therefore, community participation through participatory research methods is one of the best ways of breaking down this policy and giving it to the people. Now, once this understanding is built, once this awareness is built, their opinions will start being formulated on the basis of what they've seen around them. Right? So I believe Professor Mangla was also talking about this, right? Wherein a lot of parents within Himachal Pradesh, especially the role of women that he was discussing, it is based on what they've noticed around them. It's based on their own experiences. And that is what participatory research methods are all about, right? Therefore, when it comes to integrating this into policy, the best way for us to do that is to make sure that the people themselves have an awareness and then have an opinion and have the right platform to give that opinion out to a position of power as well as a position of influence, so that they can actually influence the governance that happens across them.
Thank you for the presentation and such an informative session. I would just like to understand that your topic was related to optimizing education in India's diverse regions. So, like you mentioned 3 examples. So, like Bolivia has around 36 ethnic groups and India has 700 plus ethnic groups. So, can you suggest 2 to 3 viable solutions that you conclude from your research studies, that how would you optimize education with more than 20 times the number of ethnic groups existing in India?
Of course, and I think this is something that I addressed in the part when I'm explaining whether we should be able to take these as case studies as well. Wherein I said the difference between the countries that were taking, the Western countries and India, is massive. The amount of stakeholders change, the amount of communities change, as you mentioned, is almost 10x, maybe even 20x of that number, right? Now, when it comes to India, we're not taking exact policies from these case studies, we're taking principles. As I mentioned, the first principle of ownership and involving community to build a sort of ownership in their mentality adds on to how they perceive education. When it comes to Bolivia, the way the Bolivian law was constructed was to decolonize the state and bring education into more indigenous areas through indigenous methods and indigenous knowledge bases. Now, that is a separate argument in itself. However, when we take that principle of indigenous involvement and into syllabus, we look at how we can do that in India. Of course, the argument would not be that every single ethnic group has an entire different syllabus and entire different community. However, creating these sort of systems wherein the local governance is able to involve these ethnic groups and create participation between the citizens and the community and therefore get it to the government, will get some level of contextualization into how these education systems need to work for these people to be interested in. This is where the policy problem of parental prioritization comes in as well. And this is what I'm trying to address through the case study of the Bolivian.
Yeah, are we looking at ethnic diversity or also looking at the economic diversity? Because I had someone who ran a school in a small village in Gujarat and he knew I was a mic and he knew I was an educator. So he ran his school in this village where the village was primarily dominated by daily wage workers. And what happened is the government school came up with this idea that we're going to give the school uniforms for free. So everybody who was going to this school with better infrastructure, better teachers, computers, straight away the daily wage workers sent their children to the other schools, and also the problem with daily wage workers with the children is that if the parents are going to work or they're going from one place to another, the children don't attend school. And I was just I was a teacher for all this while. I was not into this kind of dialogue during that time when he came to me with this problem. I had absolutely no idea what the solution to this kind of a situation would be. And because we are amongst, that's the setup where we could probably think as to how could such a situation be handled. And this was a real life, it was an actual situation. I had absolutely no idea, or probably still don't. How do we manage something like this in our country?
So it's an excellent question, and I'll also share a sentiment. I'm not an expert or anything, so I'll also share a sentiment in not having the majority or the understanding to really be able to answer the policy immediately. But the way I perceive participatory research, especially when it comes to school management, is one of the policy suggestions that I did give, was that introducing these panels where you invite the community, invite citizens, and invite people who are stakeholders, and invite district bureaucracy to create a panel and manage the school itself, will be able to get a lot of these problems out. The bigger problem that I can perceive from your question is that there's a lack of communication between the parents and the school management to understand what their requirements are and what they would prefer. Right? So if it comes to a point where the government is now offering free uniforms, as you mentioned, they would definitely prefer that. But the other school just doesn't know about that because this communication hasn't happened. So what participatory research would help in is bridging that little communication gap and getting these problems out to the people so that they can look at whether it is more important for me to introduce computers and a higher level of, let's say, technical education, or is it more important for me to incentivize education through, let's say, free uniforms, midday meal, etc.
Here it is a matter of, let's say, 300 rupees at free uniform, we pick free uniform.
So there is I'll close the session now because it's time. There is a tea break now, and yeah, we can have this session.